If you are lying awake right now, listening to a voice inside your head that will not stop talking, tonight we explore a very old teaching that says that voice is not you. You are the one listening. This is one of the deepest teachings in all of Buddhism, and it begins with a very simple question. If you can hear the voice, then who is the one hearing it? Tonight we will spend some time with this question. We will hear it through stories, some from the Buddhist tradition, some from the Zen monasteries of ancient China and Japan, and some from cultures as far apart as the Taoist sages and the Celtic coastlands. We will follow the Buddha himself, from the night he left his palace to the morning he sat beneath a tree and watched every voice in his mind rise and fall without following a single one. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. There is a woman who once wrote that she was lying in bed late at night when she first realized that the voice in her head, the running commentary that had been there for as long as she could remember, was not actually her. She had spent 60 years believing every word it said. 60 years of following its opinions, its worries, its endless replaying of conversations that were already over. And then one night, for no particular reason, she heard it the way you hear a radio in another room. Still playing, still talking, but suddenly, clearly, not her. You do not need to know anything about Buddhism to understand what we are exploring tonight. You do not need to remember anything. You do not need to quiet your mind. That is not what tonight is about. Tonight is about discovering that you are something larger than the voice, something quieter, something that has been here all along. So settle in wherever you are. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breath find its own rhythm. There is nowhere to go and nothing to fix. Thank you for joining us here at Moonlit Dharma. Let us begin. There is something happening inside you right now as you listen to these words. A voice. Not this one, the other one. The one underneath. It has probably already said something since this sentence began. Maybe it said, I wonder where this is going. Maybe it said I should try to sleep. Maybe it reminded you of something you forgot to do today. Or something someone said to you this morning that you are still turning over, still examining from different angles, still not quite finished with. That voice has been with you for a very long time. It was there when you woke up this morning. It was there when you brushed your teeth. It was there during every conversation you had today, running its own conversation alongside the one you were having out loud. It comments on everything. It judges, it plans, it remembers, it worries, it replays, it rehearses. It narrates your life as though you needed a narrator. The Buddha, over 2,500 years ago, described this voice with extraordinary clarity. He said, the mind is hard to hold back, flighty, alighting where it will. The word he used in the old language was citta, which we usually translate as mind, but the original meaning is closer to heart-mind, because it includes not just thought, but feeling, mood, the whole weather of inner experience. And about this citta, this restless, darting, never quite still companion, he said something that most of us have felt but never put into words. He said it is good to tame the mind. A tamed mind leads to bliss, but here is what most of us miss. The Buddha did not say you are the mind. He said you can tame it, and if you can tame something, you are not the thing being tamed. You are the one holding the reins. This is worth sitting with for a moment, because it changes everything. We spend decades talking to ourselves, arguing with ourselves, scolding ourselves, comforting ourselves, and we never stop to ask the most basic question of all. Who is talking to whom? If you are telling yourself to calm down, there are two of you in that sentence, the one giving the instruction and the one receiving it. Which one is you? The Buddha asked this question, and his answer was not what most of us expect. He did not say, the thinker is you. He did not say the thoughts are you. He said neither. He said there is awareness, and there are thoughts, and they are not the same thing. Think of it this way. There is an old radio in a room. It has been on for as long as you can remember. It plays news, weather, old arguments, tomorrow's worries, yesterday's regrets, opinions about everything, predictions about nothing. It plays so constantly, so automatically, that after a while you stopped noticing it was on. You began to think the radio's voice was your voice, that its opinions were your opinions, that its worries were your worries. But the radio is not you. You are the one sitting in the room, and the room is much larger, much quieter, much older than anything the radio has ever said. The Buddha saw this very clearly. In another verse he said, the mind is hard to see, very subtle. It flits wherever it lists. Let the wise person guard it. A guarded mind brings happiness. Notice the language. Guard it, not become it. Not obey it. Guard it, the way you would guard a small child who runs toward the road. You are not the child. You are the one watching. Most of us were never told this. We grew up believing that our thoughts were us, that the voice was reliable, that if it said something often enough, it must be true. You are not good enough. You should have done more. They are disappointed in you. It is too late. These are sentences the voice has been repeating for decades, and most of us never thought to ask a very simple question. Who is listening to these sentences? If you can hear the voice say you are not good enough, then there is a you that is separate from that voice, and that you, that quiet awareness behind all the noise, is what the Buddha was pointing toward 25 centuries ago. Let us explore a story about this. In a mountain village, long ago, there lived an old woman who made incense. Her hands were dark, with years of rolling sandalwood pasted into thin sticks, and her small workshop smelled of cedarwood and camphor at every hour of the day. She had been making incense since she was a girl, learning from her mother, who had learned from her mother before that. The work was simple, the rhythm was steady, and, for most of her life, she had never thought much about the voice inside her head. But one night, she could not sleep. She lay on her mat in the dark, and the voice began. It said the order for the temple is late. It said your daughter has not written in 2 months. It said your back is getting worse. It said you are getting old. It said, remember what your neighbor said last week. It said she probably meant it unkindly. It said you should have said something back. It said it is too late now. It said you always let things go too long. On and on it went. One thought pulling the next pulling another, like a thread pulling loose from a spool that seemed to have no end. And then something happened that had never happened before. She noticed the voice. Not the content of what it was saying, but the voice itself. The fact that it was there. The fact that it was talking. The fact that it had been talking. She realized for her entire life, and she had never once stepped back far enough to see it. The next morning, she sat with her neighbor, an old woman who had lived alone for many years and had a way of saying very little that meant quite a lot. They sat on the step between their houses. the way they had sat 1,000 mornings before, with tea and the smell of wood smoke drifting from the kitchen. "I could not sleep last night," the incense maker said. "Why not?" the neighbor asked. "There is a voice in my head. It would not stop talking." The neighbor poured tea. She set the cup down on the stone between them. What did it say? Everything. It said the temple order is late. It said my back is getting worse. It said my daughter does not call enough. It said I am getting old. The neighbor picked up her cup and held it for a moment without drinking. Did it say anything new? The incense maker opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. She sat very still for a long time. The tea cooled in her hands. "No," she said finally. "No, it has never said anything new. Not once. In all these years." The neighbor nodded slowly. "That is the first thing to notice," she said. "It has been saying the same things for years. It has been saying them in different orders, at different volumes, at different hours of the night, but the words are the same. And you have been believing them every time, as though hearing them again made them more true." The incense maker looked down at her dark hands, the hands that had rolled 10,000 sticks of sandalwood and cedar, and said quietly, "I thought the voice was me." The neighbor set her cup down. "Everyone does," she said, "until the night they cannot sleep." What the old incense maker discovered that night was not a way to silence the voice. She did not learn a technique or a trick or a method. She simply saw for the first time that the voice was there, that it was separate from her, that she could hear it the way she heard the rain on the roof or the dog barking across the valley. The voice was real, but it was not her. It had never been her. She had just been sitting too close to it for too long to notice the difference. This is what the Buddha was describing when he said, "The mind wanders far, alone, incorporeal, dwelling in a cave. The mind lives in its own world. It builds its own stories. It follows its own paths. And for most of us, for most of our lives, we follow it without ever realizing we have a choice. We sit so close to the radio that we forget there is a room around us. The static fills every corner, and we think the static is all there is. In every school of Buddhism, from the quiet forest traditions of Southern Asia to the great Zen monasteries of China and Japan, this recognition is considered the first real step. Not the learning of a doctrine, not the memorizing of a text, just the simple, startling act of noticing, "Oh, there is a voice, and I am the one hearing it." It is a little like living your entire life in a house with a ticking clock. The clock has been ticking since the day you were born. It ticked through your childhood, through your marriage, through the raising of your children, through the long afternoons after they left. And because it has always been there, you stopped hearing it. You thought the ticking was silence. Then one evening, in a very still moment, you hear it, not because it changed, because you finally noticed. And from that moment on, you cannot unhear it. The ticking is still there, but you are no longer inside it. You are beside it. That is what happened to the incense maker. That is what the Buddha was pointing at when he used that word, chitta, and said, "It wanders, it flits, it alights where it will." He was not complaining about the mind. He was describing it the way a bird watcher describes a bird, with clarity, with affection even, and with the understanding that the one watching is not the bird. But here is the quiet truth at the center of this teaching. You have been hearing the voice your entire life. You have been hearing it right now while listening to these words. And the very fact that you can hear it means you are not it. You are the awareness in which it appears. You are the room, not the radio. Let us explore another story about this. There was a young prince who lived in a palace where everything was arranged so that he would never be uncomfortable. His father, the king, had made sure of this. The gardens were always in bloom. The food was always warm. The musicians played softly in the evenings, and every room was lit with oil lamps that never flickered. And inside the prince's mind, there was a voice that said, "Everything is fine. This is enough. You have everything you need. Stay here." But underneath that voice, in a place the voice could not reach, there was something else. A restlessness, a question that had no words. A feeling, quiet and steady, like a low note on a string instrument, that something important was being hidden from him. One night the prince could not sleep. He lay in the dark listening to the breath of his wife beside him, and the voice said, "You are fortunate. Look at what you have. Do not be ungrateful." And the voice was not wrong. He was fortunate. He did have much. But the thing underneath the voice, the thing that was not a voice at all, would not be still. He rose quietly. He walked through the palace halls, where oil lamps burned low and the stone floors were cool under his bare feet. He passed the sleeping guards. He passed the lotus pools reflecting a sky full of stars. He stopped outside his young son's room and stood in the doorway, listening to the child breathe. The voice said, "Stay. This is your life. This is where you belong. You have a wife who loves you. You have a son who needs you. You have a kingdom waiting for you." What kind of man walks away from this? And every word the voice said was reasonable. Every word made sense. If you wrote it down and showed it to any sensible person, they would agree with the voice. But the thing underneath, the wordless knowing that lived deeper than language, moved his feet forward. One step, then another, out the gate, down the road, into the forest where no voice could follow, because there was nothing left to comment on. Just the dark, just the trees, just the sound of his own breathing. That prince, as you may know, became the Buddha. And the journey he began that night was not a journey away from his life. It was a journey towards something the voice had been covering up for years. The voice said everything is fine, but the silence underneath said there is something you have not yet seen. And the silence was right. This is worth pausing over. The voice inside Siddhartha's head was not evil. It was not lying. It was doing exactly what voices do. It was keeping him safe, comfortable, enclosed. The voice is a guardian in that way. It guards the familiar. It protects what it knows. But it cannot see beyond what it knows. It cannot imagine what it has never experienced. And so it says stay, not because staying is best, but because staying is all it understands. Most of us have had a moment like that. Not as dramatic as leaving a palace, but a moment when something inside us was louder than all the words. A moment when we knew, without the voice telling us, that something needed to change. Maybe it was the night you decided to leave a job that was making you ill. Maybe it was the afternoon you sat in a parked car and cried and did not know why. Maybe it was a Tuesday morning when you looked in the mirror and the person looking back seemed like a stranger. In those moments, the voice went quiet and something truer took its place. If you are lying here tonight and the voice is busy, know this: the voice is doing its job. It has been doing its job faithfully for 50, 60, 70 years. It kept you alert when your children were small. It reminded you to check the stove and lock the door. It helped you plan and organize and hold a household together. It earned its place, but somewhere along the way, it forgot how to rest. And now it runs through the night like an engine with no off switch, turning over the same fuel again and again. Tonight is not about turning it off. Tonight is about stepping far enough back to see it clearly. To see that the voice has been running for a very long time, and that you, the one hearing it, have been here even longer. You were here before the voice learned your name. You were here before it learned to worry. You will be here after it, finally, gently, quiets down. That something is what we are exploring tonight. Not a technique, not a method, just a recognition. A gentle turning of the attention from the voice to the one who hears it. So, here is something simple to carry with you tonight. The next time you notice a thought, instead of following it, simply notice. There is thinking happening. Not I am thinking. Just thinking is happening. You do not need to stop the thought. You do not need to judge it or push it away. Just see it the way you would see a bird crossing the sky. It appears. It moves. It is gone. And the sky remains. You can try it right now if you like. Wait for the next thought. You do not need to go looking for it. It will come on its own. Thoughts always do. And when it arrives, just notice it. See its shape. See that it appeared from somewhere you cannot name, and that it will leave the same way. You did not create it. You did not choose it. It came and it will go. And you, the one watching, will still be here. That small shift from I am thinking to thinking is happening is where everything begins. It is the moment the incense maker had in the dark. It is the moment the prince had at the gate. It is the moment the Buddha described when he said a tamed mind leads to bliss. Not a silenced mind, not an empty mind, a tamed mind, one you can see, one you can watch, one you can gently, kindly set to the side, the way you would turn down the volume on an old radio that has been playing too long. You do not need to master this tonight. You do not need to be good at it. The incense maker was not good at it. She simply noticed, and that was enough. For now, just let the idea rest somewhere inside you, the way a seed rests in soil before it knows what it will become. The voice will keep talking. That is what voices do. But now you know something you did not know before. You know it is a voice, and you are the one hearing it. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. You do not need to feel any particular way. You are simply here, and that is enough. When you are ready, we will continue together. In the next chapter, we go deeper into what the Buddha meant when he said that nothing you call yourself, not your body, not your feelings, not your thoughts, not even your awareness, is truly you. What we have begun to notice, that the voice is there, that it can be heard, leads us now to a deeper question. If the voice is not you, then who are you? What is left when you take the voice away? This is the question the Buddha asked 2,500 years ago, and his answer changed everything. Shortly after his awakening, the Buddha gave a teaching to 5 monks in a deer park. It was only his second formal teaching, and it was in some ways the most radical thing he ever said. He looked at these 5 men who had been seeking the truth for years, and he told them something none of them expected. He said form is not self. Feeling is not self. Perception is not self. Mental formations are not self. Consciousness is not self. He went through every layer of human experience, one by one, and said the same thing about each. Not you, not you, not you, not you, not you. This teaching is called the anattā Sutta, the discourse on the characteristic of non-self, and the word at its center is anattā, which is usually translated as non-self or not self. It does not mean you do not exist. It means that the thing you call yourself, the collection of habits and memories and opinions and preferences that you have been assembling and rearranging for 60 or 70 years, is not a fixed, permanent, solid thing. It is more like weather. It changes, it moves, it forms and dissolves and forms again. And the one watching the weather is not the weather itself. This can sound frightening at first. If I am not my thoughts, if I am not my feelings, if I am not my body, then what am I? But the Buddha was not trying to take anything away. He was trying to show something that had been there all along, hidden beneath the pile of identities we carry through our lives. Most of us have spent a lifetime collecting these identities the way some people collect books on a shelf. You were a daughter first, someone's little girl. Then you were a student, then a wife perhaps, then a mother, then a professional, then a grandmother, then a retiree. Each identity came with its own voice. The daughter's voice said, please them. The mother's voice said, protect them. The professional's voice said, prove yourself. The grandmother's voice said, be useful. And now, lying here tonight, you might notice that some of those voices are still running, even though the roles that created them ended years ago. The mother's voice still worries about children who are 50. The professional's voice still measures your worth by what you produce. They play on, like old radio stations broadcasting programs that went off the air a long time ago. So here is the question the Buddha was really asking. If you have been a daughter and a wife, and a mother and a grandmother, and a colleague and a neighbor and a friend, and if each of those identities felt completely real at the time, which one is the real you? The answer he gave those 5 monks in the deer park was both simple and startling. None of them, and all of them. And something else entirely, something quieter, something that was present before any of those roles began, and will be present after the last one ends. Let us explore a story about this. There was a woman who had changed her name 3 times before she was 60. She was born with her father's name, and she carried it through school and into her first job at the county library, where she shelved books and learned to love the smell of old paper. Then she married and took her husband's name, and for 26 years, she was someone else on every piece of mail, every doctor's form, every tax return. Then her husband died, and after the grief settled into something she could carry, she married again and took a third name and became someone else again. One evening she sat at the kitchen table after everyone else had gone to bed. The house was quiet. A single lamp made a circle of yellow light on the old wooden surface, and her tea had gone cold without her noticing. Her granddaughter had asked her something earlier that day. A question so simple it had been turning inside her ever since. Grandma, who were you before you were grandma? She had laughed at the time. I was your mother's mother, she said. No, the girl said, before that, before any of that. Who were you when you were just you? And sitting at the table that night, with the house breathing around her, she realized she did not have an answer. She had been someone's daughter for 18 years, someone's wife for 26, someone's mother for the rest. She had always been defined by the people she belonged to, the roles she filled, the names she carried. But underneath all of those names, underneath all of those roles, there was something that had never changed, something that had watched the daughter become a wife, become a mother, become a widow, become a wife again. Something that had no name at all. She sat with that feeling for a long time. The tea went cold. The lamp flickered once and steadied. Outside the window, the neighbors' lights went out one by one, and the street grew quiet in that particular way. Small towns grow quiet after 10 o'clock, when even the dogs have stopped barking, and the only sound is the wind finding its way through the gaps in the fence. She could not describe it. She could not point to it. But she knew it was there the way she knew the kitchen table was solid. Not because she had proof, but because she had been leaning on it her whole life. It was the thing that had been present when she was 5 and afraid of the dark, and present when she was 25 and afraid of nothing, and present now at 63, afraid of different things entirely, but still, somehow, the same one watching. The names changed, the fears changed. The face in the mirror changed so much she sometimes did not recognize it, but the watching did not change. The quiet awareness behind all of it remained exactly as it had always been. Her granddaughter would not remember asking the question. Children ask questions like stones skipping across water, lightly, quickly, already moving to the next one before the first has sunk. But the grandmother would remember it for the rest of her life, because it was the night she stopped looking for herself in her names and began to notice the one who had been carrying all those names without ever needing one of her own. What the woman was noticing, without knowing the language for it, was what the Buddha called anattā. She was noticing that every identity she had ever carried was real, was valid, was important, but was not permanent. Each one had come, and each one had changed, and she had been present through all of them. The one who was present, the one who watched the names come and go, that one had no name. And that was not a loss. That was a kind of freedom she had never imagined. In Buddhist understanding, the Buddha described 5 layers that make up what we call a person. He called them the 5 khandhas, the 5 aggregates. And what he did with them, in that quiet teaching in the deer park, was both gentle and precise. The first is form, the body. The physical shape that sits in a chair or lies in a bed. The body you washed this morning, the hands that held a cup, the knees that ached on the stairs. He asked the monks, is form permanent or impermanent? They answered, impermanent. And he said, is what is impermanent satisfying or unsatisfying? They said, unsatisfying. Then is it fitting to regard what is impermanent, unsatisfying and subject to change, as this is mine, this I am, this is myself? And they said no, it is not fitting. Then he moved to feeling. The raw sense of pleasant, unpleasant or neutral that accompanies every moment. The warmth of a blanket, the ache in a shoulder, the dull heaviness of a sleepless night. Each feeling real, each feeling vivid, each feeling gone by morning. Is feeling permanent or impermanent? Impermanent. Then it is not self. Then perception, the labeling, the recognition, the quiet machine in the mind that says, this is a pillow, this is dark, this is loneliness, this is Tuesday. Always sorting, always categorizing. Impermanent, not self. Then mental formations, the habits, the reactions, the grooves that decades of living have worn into the way you respond to the world. The flinch when someone raises their voice. The warmth when a grandchild calls. The guilt that arrives at the same time every evening for reasons you cannot quite trace. All of these patterns, real as they are, shift and change, and sometimes disappear without warning. Impermanent, not self. And finally, consciousness, the knowing itself, the bare fact that something is being experienced. Even this, the Buddha said, is not permanent. It rises and falls with every moment. It is bright in the morning and dim at night. It disappears entirely in deep sleep and returns without being asked. Impermanent, not self. 5 layers, 5 times the same question, 5 times the same answer. And at the end of this teaching, all 5 monks understood. They saw that what they had been calling me was a collection of processes, not a thing. Like a chariot made of wheels and axles and a frame. There was no chariot separate from its parts. And there was no self separate from these 5 shifting, changing, endlessly rearranging layers. This can sound cold when written on a page, but the Buddha did not say it coldly. He said it the way a doctor tells you, the test came back clear. He was delivering relief. Because if the self is not a fixed, solid, permanent thing, then all the stories the voice tells about that self are not fixed either. The voice says you are a failure, but which you, the daughter, the mother, the professional, the grandmother, they are all different people. The voice says you will never change, but you have already changed 1,000 times. The voice says this is who you are, but who you are has been shifting since the day you were born, and it has not stopped shifting tonight. He was not saying the me does not exist at all. He was saying it does not exist the way we think it does. It is not a solid thing sitting in the center of your chest like a stone. It is more like a river. You can stand beside a river and call it by its name. You can say, this is the same river I stood beside when I was a child. But the water that flows past you now is not the same water that flowed past you then. Not a single drop is the same. The river is real, but it is not a thing. It is a process, and so are you. There is a story from the Taoist tradition, from a philosopher named Zhuangzi, who lived in China about 300 years before the Common Era, that reaches toward this same understanding from a completely different direction. One afternoon, Zhuangzi fell asleep in his garden and dreamed he was a butterfly. In the dream, he was not Zhuangzi dreaming he was a butterfly. He was simply a butterfly. He fluttered from flower to flower. He felt the wind under his wings. He tasted nectar. He had no memory of being a philosopher, no memory of having a human name or a human body or human worries. He was completely, entirely a butterfly. Then he woke up, and there he was, Zhuangzi again. Hands, feet, a garden, a philosopher's robe, the smell of plum blossoms, a cup of cold tea beside him on the grass. But something had shifted. He sat very still and asked a question that has stayed alive for 23 centuries. Am I Zhuangzi, who just dreamed he was a butterfly? Or am I a butterfly who is now dreaming he is Zhuangzi? He did not answer the question. That was the point. Because the answer, whichever way it went, would have closed something that was meant to stay open. If he said, I am Zhuangzi, he would be choosing one identity and discarding the other. If he said, I am the butterfly, he would be doing the same thing in reverse. But the truth was larger than either answer. The truth was that he had been both fully, completely, without any contradiction. And the one who had been both was not limited to either. Think about your own life for a moment. You have been so many different people. The girl who climbed trees, the young woman who fell in love for the first time, the mother who sat up all night with a sick child, the woman who buried a parent, the woman lying here right now. Each one felt entirely real. Each one was entirely real, but each one was also temporary. And the one who lived through all of them, the one who remembers the tree and the love and the long night and the burial, that one is still here, still watching, still aware, still not quite captured by any single name or any single story. The Buddhist tradition and the Taoist tradition arrived at this insight independently, separated by geography and language and centuries of different practice. But they met at the same quiet place. As the Buddha told his monks, all that is subject to arising is subject to cessation. Every identity arises, every identity changes, and the one who watches them arise and change is not any single one of them. This is not an idea that needs to be understood tonight. It is an idea that needs to be felt. And you may already be feeling it, even now, as you lie here and listen. There is a part of you that has been listening to these words, and another part that has been having its own conversation alongside them. One part hears the stories. Another part thinks about tomorrow. Another part notices the weight of the blanket. Another part wonders if you are getting sleepy. All of these parts are real. All of them are happening. But none of them on its own is you. You are the quiet space in which all of them appear. And that quiet space does not need to do anything tonight. It does not need to meditate or practice or improve. It is already here. It has always been here. It was here before the voice learned your name, and it will be here long after the voice has finally, gently, run out of things to say. You can feel this very simply, without any philosophy at all. You can feel it right now, lying wherever you are, by trying one small thing. The next time a worry arrives, instead of saying, "I am worried," say quietly to yourself, "There is worry." Instead of "I am sad," say "There is sadness." Instead of "I cannot sleep," say "There is wakefulness." You are not changing the experience. The worry is still there. The sadness is still there. The wakefulness is still there. But you have moved yourself from inside the feeling to beside the feeling. You have become the room instead of the radio. You have become the sky instead of the cloud. And from that position, something very strange happens. The feeling, without your full attention holding it in place, begins to move on its own. It loosens, it softens, it drifts, not because you forced it, because you stopped holding it so tightly. A cloud that is not being watched does not stop being a cloud. But it does what clouds do. It moves, it changes shape, it thins at the edges. And eventually, quietly, it passes. You may notice this happening tonight. If you are patient with it, a thought will come. You will see it. You will say, "There is a thought." And for a moment, just a moment, there will be a small space between you and the thought that was not there before. That space is what the Buddha was pointing at. That space is what Zhuangzi felt when he woke from his butterfly dream and could not tell which life was real. That space is what the woman at the kitchen table felt when she stopped looking for herself in her names and found something that had no name at all. Here is something to carry with you. You have been many people in your life: daughter, wife, mother, grandmother, friend, stranger. Each one felt like the real you. Each one was real for a time, but you are also the one who was present through all of them. The one who watched the names come and go. That one does not need a name. That one does not need to be anything. That one is already here, already resting, already at peace. And tonight, that is more than enough. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Feel the weight of your body on the bed, the pillow against your head, the warmth of the blanket around you. You do not need to hold on to anything we have talked about. It will stay with you the way a scent stays in a room long after the flowers have been taken away. Notice the radio if it is still playing. Notice the voice if it is still talking. And notice, just for a moment, the one who notices. That one is very still tonight. That one has been listening quietly to everything, taking nothing personally, needing nothing to change. That one is you. Or rather, that one is closer to you than anything the voice has ever said. When you are ready, we will continue together. In the next chapter, we will sit with the part of the voice that is perhaps hardest to recognize, because it hides inside everything we see. It is the part that labels, the part that sorts the world into good and bad, right and wrong, enough and not enough. And it is so fast, so automatic, that most of us have never caught it in the act. There is a part of the voice that works so quickly, you may never have noticed it. It arrives before you have time to think, before you have time to choose, before you have even finished seeing what is in front of you. It has already told you what it is: good, bad, beautiful, ugly, right, wrong, too much, not enough. It labels everything, and it does it so fast that by the time you become aware of what you are looking at, the label is already in place, and you mistake the label for the thing itself. The Buddha had a word for this. He called it sanya, which is usually translated as perception, but the meaning is closer to recognition or labeling. It is the part of the mind that takes raw experience and sorts it into categories. This sound is pleasant. That feeling is unpleasant. This person is kind. That person is difficult. This day was good. That day was bad. Sanya is not thinking. It happens before thinking. It is the quiet, automatic sorting machine that runs beneath every conscious thought you have ever had. And here is what makes it so difficult to catch. You almost never see it working. You see its results. You see the labels. But you do not see the moment the label was applied. It is like walking into a room where every object already has a name tag on it. You assume the name tags are part of the objects. You assume the chair was always called chair. The darkness was always called lonely. The silence was always called empty, but they were not. The labels were added, and they were added by a part of your mind that you did not ask to do the job. Think about what happens when you wake in the middle of the night. Before you open your eyes, the labeling has already begun. 3 in the morning, the voice says, and immediately the label bad arrives. Too early. Something is wrong. I will be tired tomorrow. None of those are facts about 3 in the morning. 3 in the morning is simply an hour. It is dark and it is quiet and the house is still. But by the time you have opened your eyes, the labels have already built a wall around the experience, and you are no longer lying in the quiet dark. You are lying in a problem. The old radio does this too. It does not simply play music. It plays commentary. It tells you what the music means. It tells you whether the song is sad or happy, whether you should feel nostalgic or anxious, whether this station is the right one or the wrong one. And after years and years of listening to the commentary, you forget that the music was there first, before any label, before any opinion, just sound moving through the air. The Buddha pointed to this in a verse that has stayed with practitioners for millennia. Look upon the world as a bubble, he said. Look upon it as a mirage. What he meant was not that the world is not real. The cup in your hand is real. The bed beneath you is real. The night outside your window is real. But the meaning you give to these things, the labels, the judgments, the stories your mind wraps around them, those are the mirage. The cup is a cup. Your mind adds the word lonely when you drink from it alone. The night is a night. Your mind adds the word long when sleep will not come. The label feels like the truth, but it is an addition, not a fact. There is a teaching that makes this very clear. It comes from a man named Bodhi who traveled a great distance to ask the Buddha a single question. He wanted to know, in the simplest possible terms, how to be free. And the Buddha, who sometimes gave teachings that lasted for hours, gave Bodhi an answer that lasted only a few seconds. He said, in the seen, there is only the seen. In the heard, there is only the heard. In the sensed, there is only the sensed. In the known, there is only the known. That is all. No labels, no judgment, no story. Just the raw experience as it is, before the mind has time to wrap it in meaning. In the seen, there is only the seen. Not the seen plus your opinion of it. Not the seen plus your memory of something similar. Not the seen plus your worry about what it means. Just the seen. And when you can rest there, even for a moment, something opens up. The world becomes larger, quicker, more spacious. Because you have stopped adding to it, let us explore a story about this. In a small town, where the road bent twice before reaching the river, there was an old woman who sold tea from a wooden cart. She had been there for as long as anyone could remember. Her cart was always in the same spot, beneath the same persimmon tree, and her tea was always the same, brewed from the same leaves, poured from the same clay pot, served in the same small cups that had been mended so many times the cracks had become. Part of the pattern, one autumn afternoon, two travelers stopped at her cart. They had come from different directions and did not know each other. The first was a merchant who had been on the road for 3 days and had not slept well. The second was a woman returning home after visiting her grandchildren, tired but content. The tea seller poured 2 cups from the same pot and set them down. The merchant drank and grimaced. "This tea is bitter," he said. The woman returning home drank from the same pot and smiled. "This tea is lovely," she said. "There is something sweet in it." The tea seller looked at them both. She poured herself a cup and held it for a moment, feeling the warmth through the clay. "The tea is the tea," she said quietly. "The bitter and the sweet, those you brought with you." The merchant frowned. "That cannot be right. I can taste the bitterness." "Yes," the tea seller said. "You can, and she can taste the sweetness. And I, who have been drinking this same tea for 30 years, taste only warmth. The tea has not changed. What changes is the mouth that receives it." The merchant sat with this for a while. He did not argue again. He finished his tea in silence, and when he left, he placed an extra coin on the cart, not for the tea, but for something he could not quite name. What the tea seller understood, in her quiet way, was what the Buddha was describing with the word sanya. The tea was the tea. The bitterness was a label the merchant's mind had placed upon it, drawn from 3 days of bad sleep and sore feet, and the accumulated frustration of a long road. The sweetness was a label the woman's mind had placed upon it, drawn from the warmth of grandchildren and the relief of heading home. Neither label was wrong, but neither label was the tea. They were additions, projections. The mind's habit of coloring everything it touches with whatever mood it carries. Most of us do this all day long without realizing it. We label the morning before it has had time to become anything. We label a phone call before we answer it. We label a silence as awkward or a pause as rejection. We label ourselves most harshly of all. Not smart enough, not young enough, not doing enough. And because the labels arrive so quickly, so automatically, we believe them the way we believe the floor is solid. We never think to check. The tea seller had spent 30 years with the same tea. That was her advantage. She had seen so many people project so many different labels onto the same cup that the labels themselves had become transparent to her. She could see through them to the tea underneath. She did not need to fight the labels. She simply outlasted them. After 30 years of watching bitter and sweet and ordinary and special pass through her cart like weather, she learned to taste what was actually in the cup. And what was actually in the cup was warmth. That was all. That was enough. In Buddhist understanding, this is what practice slowly reveals. Not that the labels are evil, or that the mind is broken for producing them. The mind labels because that is what minds do. It is the mind's way of keeping you oriented in the world. Without labels, you could not cross a street, or cook a meal, or recognize your own grandchild's face. Labels are useful. They become a problem only when you forget they are labels. When you mistake the map for the territory. When you believe your opinion of the night is the night itself. Let us explore another story about this. There was a woman who had been a school principal for 35 years. She was good at her job. She was organized and firm and fair, and she cared about the children in a way that made the school feel, to many of them, like a second home. But the job had trained her mind to do one thing very well. It had trained her to evaluate, to sort, to label. This student is gifted. That one is struggling. This teacher is reliable. That one needs watching. This parent is involved. That one has given up. For 35 years, her mind sorted people into categories, quickly and efficiently, the way a machine sorts mail into slots. When she retired at 63, the machine did not stop. It simply turned inward. She began sorting herself the way she had once sorted students. She labeled her mornings productive or wasted. She labeled her afternoons useful or lazy. She labeled her evenings, her meals, her conversations, her contributions to conversations, her silences in conversations. And increasingly, as the months of retirement stretched on, and the structure of the school day was no longer there to hold her, the labels became harsher. The morning she slept until 8 was labeled lazy. The afternoon she watched television was labeled pointless. The evening she did not call anyone was labeled isolated. Each label arrived quickly, automatically, the way a grade appears at the top of an essay before the student has even read the comments. And the cruelest labels were the ones that arrived at night in the dark, when there was nothing else to sort. Useless, behind, forgettable, old. These were not thoughts she chose. They were labels the machine produced, and she believed them the way her students had believed the grades she wrote on their papers. Without questioning, without asking who wrote the grade, without wondering if the grader might be wrong. One morning she went into her garden. It was early, and the dew was still on everything, and the light was the kind of light that comes just after sunrise, when everything looks new and slightly golden. She knelt beside a flower she had planted the previous autumn. It had bloomed overnight, And for a reason she could not explain, she did not label it. She did not say beautiful. She did not say the color is wrong. She did not say I should have planted it deeper. She did not compare it to the neighbor's garden. She simply saw it, the petals, the dew, the way it held itself open as though it had nowhere else to be. And in that moment, for perhaps the first time since she was a child, she saw something without adding anything to it. In the scene there was only the scene, no label, no grade, no score, just the raw, quiet fact of a flower existing in the morning light. She knelt there for a long time, longer than she had knelt anywhere in years. And when she finally stood up, her knees aching, the dew soaking through her robe, she noticed that the labeling machine in her mind had gone quiet. Not permanently, not forever, but for a little while. And in that little while, the world was wider than she remembered it being. She told her daughter about it later that week. I saw a flower, she said, and for once I did not grade it. Her daughter laughed gently. What did you do instead? I just looked at it. I just saw it. It sounds like nothing, but it was the most restful thing I have done in months. What she experienced in the garden was what the Buddha was describing to Bahia. In the scene, only the scene. She did not stop the labels by force. She did not argue with the machine. She did not scold herself for having spent 35 years sorting everything she saw into categories. She simply, for one morning, looked before the label arrived. And in that gap, that tiny space between the seeing and the naming, she found something she had forgotten was there, the world as it is, without her opinion of it, without her score, without her grade, just a flower, just the dew, just the light. In the Mayan tradition, from the ancient peoples of Central America, there is an understanding about time that carries a similar insight. The Maya did not see time the way most modern cultures see it, as a straight line moving from past to future, with each moment labeled and filed away. Instead, they understood each day as carrying its own spirit, its own nahual, its own energy. A day of rain was not a bad day, it was a rain day. A day of wind was not a difficult day, it was a wind day. The event and the label were not the same thing. The rain was rain. The judgment of bad was something the human mind added afterward. This is a small difference in language, but it is a very large difference in experience. When you stop labeling the rain as bad, you begin to hear it differently. You hear the sound of it on the roof, the rhythm of it on the leaves, the way it makes the air smell like wet earth and fresh green things. When you stop labeling the silence as lonely, you begin to feel it differently. You feel the spaciousness of it, the way it holds you, the way it asks nothing from you. When you stop labeling yourself as not enough, you begin to see yourself differently. Not because anything changed, because you removed something that was never really there to begin with. The label fell away, and what was underneath had been waiting, quietly, patiently, all along. This is true for the voice in your head as well. The voice labels every thought it produces. This thought is important. Pay attention to this one. This worry is real. You should be afraid of this. But the thoughts themselves, before the voice labels them, are just thoughts. Small movements of the mind, like ripples on water. They come and they go. They have no weight unless the label gives them weight. And the label is not the thought. The label is the voice talking about the thought. One more layer of radio static between you and the quiet room you are sitting in. So, here is something simple to carry with you tonight. Pick one small thing around you right now. the pillow beneath your head, the sound of the room, the temperature of the air against your face. Try to notice it before the label arrives, before soft or hard, before quiet or loud, before comfortable or uncomfortable. Just the raw sensation, the way a newborn might feel it, before language, before categories, before good and bad. You may only manage it for a second or two. That is perfectly fine. In that second, something very quiet happens. The world stops being a collection of opinions and becomes, just for a moment, a collection of experiences. The pillow is not good or bad. It is just pressure and warmth. The room is not quiet or loud. It is just sound, or the absence of sound, which is its own kind of sound. The night is not long or short. It is just here, breathing alongside you, asking nothing, offering nothing, simply present. In that second, you are seeing the world the way the tea seller sees her tea, the way the retired principal saw her flower, the way the Maya saw each day as its own spirit, carrying its own nature, refusing to be reduced to a single word. The way the Buddha told Bahia to see everything just as it is, without the mirage, without the name tag, without the grade. And if the labels come back, as they will, as they always do, that is all right too. You are not trying to stop them. You are simply learning to see them for what they are: additions, opinions. One more channel on the old radio. They will keep playing. But you have heard the silence underneath them now, just for a moment. And that moment cannot be taken away from you. It belongs to the part of you that watches, the part that sees without sorting, the part that was here before the first label, arrived, and will be here after the last one falls away. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Let your body settle a little deeper into wherever it is resting. You do not need to do anything with what you have heard. It is already doing its own quiet work. The way rain does its work on a garden without anyone standing over it giving instructions. When you are ready, we will continue together. In the next chapter, we will listen to a different part of the voice. The part that tells you your story. The part that has been narrating your life in a single version for so long that you may have forgotten there were other versions all along. There is one more thing the voice does that we have not yet looked at closely. It tells you your story. Not the story of what happened, but the story of what it means. And it has been telling you that story for so long that you have come to believe it is the only version. Everyone has a version. The voice assembles it from memories, from moments of pain, from things people said to you 20 or 30 or 40 years ago that somehow lodged themselves in a permanent place. And from these fragments, it builds a narrative, a through line, a single sentence that explains your entire life. I am the one who always gives too much. I am the one who was never quite enough. I am the one who missed my chance. I am the one who holds things together for everyone else and falls apart when no one is looking. The Buddha understood this. He saw that the mind does not simply produce thoughts. It produces stories. And the most persistent story it tells is the story of self. In the old language, this was called attavada, the doctrine of self, the stubbornly held belief that there is a fixed, permanent, unchanging me at the center of everything. And from that belief, the mind constructs a life story with that me as the main character. It selects the memories that fit the story and quietly discards the ones that do not. It remembers the failures if the story is about failure. It remembers the rejections if the story is about being rejected. It edits, it curates, it shapes the past into evidence for whatever conclusion it has already reached. The Buddha said something very direct about this. He said, whatever an enemy may do to an enemy, or a hater to a hater, a wrongly directed mind can do one far greater harm. Notice the word wrongly directed. Not a broken mind, not a sick mind. A mind that is pointed in the wrong direction. And the wrong direction, in many cases, is inward, toward a story that was never the whole truth. This is what makes the storytelling voice different from the labeling voice we explored earlier. The labeling voice works in the moment. It sees the tea and says bitter. It sees the morning and says wasted. But the storytelling voice works across time. It gathers moments from across an entire life and arranges them into a single arc. And that arc always bends toward the same conclusion, because the voice decided the conclusion first and then went looking for evidence. You can see this in the way the voice treats memory. It does not remember your life the way a camera would, recording everything equally. It remembers selectively. It remembers the time you said the wrong thing at dinner, but not the 100 dinners where you said exactly the right thing. It remembers the opportunity you missed, but not the 3 you took. It remembers the person who left, but not the ones who stayed. And from this carefully selected collection of moments, it builds a case, a legal brief, a closing argument. And the verdict is always the same. You could have done better. You should have been more. You are not quite the person you were supposed to be. The Buddha saw this pattern with extraordinary clarity. He understood that the mind does not simply think, it constructs. It builds a version of you out of fragments, and then it presents that version as though it were the whole person. And because the construction happens so gradually, over so many years, you never notice the gaps. You never notice what was left out. You accept the story the way you accept that the sun rises in the east. It seems so obvious, so self-evident, that questioning it feels absurd. Think about the voice that visits you at night, when the house is quiet and the day is over, and there is nothing left to distract you. The voice begins its narration. It opens the old files. It pulls out the old arguments. It revisits the old decisions, and it tells them the same way every time. You should have known better. You were foolish. You let people down. It never tells the version where you did the best you could with what you had. It never tells the version where you were kind more often than you were careless. It never tells the version where the people you think you failed have already forgiven you and moved on. Those versions do not fit the narrative, so the voice leaves them out. Let us explore a story about this. In a harbor town, where the fishing boats came in every afternoon trailing the smell of salt and seaweed, there lived an old fisherman who had spent most of his life on the water. His hands were thick with calluses. His face was the color of walnut from years of sun. And he was known in the town for 2 things. The first was that he could read the weather better than anyone, just by looking at the way the clouds sat on the horizon. The second was that he told everyone the same story. I was supposed to go to the university, he would say. My teacher told me I was smart enough, but my father needed me on the boat, so I stayed, and that was that. He told this story to the other fishermen while they mended their nets in the late afternoon sun. He told it to the woman at the bakery while she wrapped his bread in paper. He told it to his wife on their wedding night, and he told it again at her funeral 40 years later, as though it explained something about the life they had shared. He told it to his daughter when she was small, sitting on his lap, smelling of salt water, and he told it to her again when she was grown and had children of her own. He told it so many times it became a groove in his mind, a path worn smooth by decades of walking the same way. Every failure in his life, every frustration, every moment of bitterness or envy or self-doubt, he traced back to that one decision. If I had gone to the university, if my father had not needed me, if I had been free. His granddaughter came to visit one summer. She was 17, sharp and curious, and not yet old enough to be afraid of asking the wrong question. They sat on the dock one evening, their feet hanging over the edge, watching the water turn orange with the last of the light. He told her the story. She had heard it before, but this time she listened differently. "Grandpa," she said after a while, "what if that story is not true?" He looked at her. "What do you mean it is not true? I was there. It happened." "I know it happened," she said. "But is it the whole story? You said you stayed because your father needed you. But did you also stay because you loved the water? Because you were good at this? Because you built a life here that someone at a university might have dreamed about having?" He did not answer. She went on, the way young people sometimes do when they have found the edge of something and cannot stop pulling at it. "You have a house, you have children, you have grandchildren, you can read the sky. You have been doing something you are good at for 50 years. Is it possible that the story you tell is only one version, and there are other versions that are just as true, and you never told those?" The old fisherman sat very still. The water lapped against the pilings beneath them. A gull turned in the last of the light and settled on a post nearby. "No one has ever said that to me," he said quietly. His hands, those thick, calloused hands that had hauled nets since he was 14 years old, were resting on his knees. He looked down at them the way you look at something you are seeing for the first time. "I know," she said. "That is why I am saying it." They sat for a while longer. The water had turned from orange to something darker, and the first lights were coming on along the harbor wall. Somewhere behind them, a woman was calling her children home for supper. The fisherman cleared his throat. "You know what the strange thing is," he said. "I do love the water. I always have, even on the worst days. Even when the catch was poor, and the wind was wrong, and the boat leaked, and my back ached so badly I could not stand straight. I loved being out there. I never told anyone that part." "Why not?" his granddaughter asked. "Because it did not fit," he said. And then he laughed, a short, surprised laugh, as though he had caught himself in the middle of a trick he had been playing on himself for 50 years. What the granddaughter did, without knowing any Buddhist philosophy, was what the Buddha was pointing at when he spoke of attavada. She did not tell her grandfather that his story was wrong. She did not dismiss his pain or his regret. She simply showed him that his story was one version, one arrangement of the same facts, and that there were other arrangements, equally true, that the voice had never bothered to mention, because it did not fit. That is the sentence worth hearing again. The fisherman had a whole life of evidence that he loved the water. 50 years of evidence, and the voice had never mentioned it. Not once. Because the story the voice was telling was a story of loss, and loving the water did not belong in a story of loss, so the voice left it out. The way a biographer might leave out an entire decade if it did not serve the thesis. This is what the voice does. It is not a liar. It does not invent events that never happened. It is something more subtle than that. It is an editor. It selects, it emphasizes, it arranges. And it always arranges in the same direction, toward the same conclusion, because the conclusion came first, and the evidence was gathered afterward. The voice decided, you are not enough, and then it went looking for proof. It found the proof because there is always proof if you look hard enough. There is always a conversation you handled badly, a decision you wish you had made differently, a person you wish you had treated with more care. The voice collects these and ignores everything else, and the story it tells sounds so complete, so well supported, so thoroughly documented, that you mistake it for the truth. But the truth is that you have lived thousands of days, tens of thousands, and the voice has selected a handful of them and called that your life. It is as though someone took a book of 500 pages and read you only the sad paragraphs and said, this is what the book is about. There is a teaching from the life of the Buddha that reaches into the heart of this. On the night before his awakening, Siddhartha sat beneath a large fig tree and resolved not to move until he had seen through every illusion the mind could produce. And the mind, as if accepting the challenge, produced them all. First came the voice of desire. It showed him images of comfort, of pleasure, of the life he had left behind, the palace, the gardens, the warm food, the soft music. Come back, the voice said. This is where you belong. Siddhartha watched the images appear. He did not follow them. He did not argue with them. He simply watched. Then came the voice of fear. It told him he would fail. It told him he was not strong enough, not wise enough, not pure enough. It told him the other monks who had abandoned him were right to leave. It told him he was alone and would always be alone. No one believes in you, the voice said. No one is coming to help. Siddhartha watched. He did not flinch. He did not defend himself. He did not construct a counter-narrative. He did not say, but I am strong enough, or but I have trained for years, or but those monks were wrong to leave. He simply saw the voice for what it was, a voice, not the truth, not a fact, a story the mind was telling, assembled from fragments of memory and fear, arranged to sound convincing. The same kind of story the fisherman told about the university. The same kind of story you may be telling yourself right now, in the dark, about who you are and what your life has meant. Then came the voice of doubt, the most dangerous voice of all, because it does not shout. It speaks quietly. It said, who do you think you are? An ordinary man sitting under an ordinary tree, thinking he can understand what no one has understood. It said, you are not special. It said, this is arrogance. It said, go home. And Siddhartha, in what may be the most important moment in the history of Buddhist teaching, did something very simple. He reached down and touched the earth. The gesture meant I am here. Not I am special. Not I am worthy. Just I am here. The earth is here. This moment is here. And no story the voice tells can change that. Then he said 3 words that have echoed through 25 centuries of practice. I see you, Mara. Mara was the name given to the force of illusion, the voice that tempts and frightens and doubts. And by naming it, by seeing it, the Buddha did not destroy it. He simply took away its power. Because a voice that has been seen is no longer a voice that controls. It is just a sound in the room, just one more channel on the old radio. And the one who sees it is the one who has always been free. Think about what happened in that moment under the tree. The voice of desire said, "Go back." The voice of fear said, "You are not enough." The voice of doubt said, "Who do you think you are?" 3 voices, 3 stories. Each one assembled from real memories, real feelings, real moments of Siddhartha's life. None of them invented, all of them partial. And Siddhartha did not argue with any of them. He did not build a counter-story about how he was special or destined or chosen. He simply touched the ground and said, "I am here." He refused to be a character in any of the stories the voice was telling. He chose instead to be the one sitting in the room while the radio played. This is what the granddaughter did for the fisherman in her own small way. She said, "I see your story," and in that seeing, the story loosened. It did not disappear. The fisherman did not suddenly forget his regrets or stop wishing he had gone to the university. But the story shifted from being the only truth to being one truth among many. And in that shift, there was room for the other versions. Room for the life he had actually lived, not just the life he had wished for. So here is something simple to carry with you tonight. That story you tell about yourself, the one that begins with "I always" or "I never" or "if only." Tonight, just for a moment, imagine it is a story someone else told you. You heard it so many times you forgot it was not yours to begin with. You adopted it. You built your days around it. You let it decide what you could and could not do, what you deserved and did not deserve, what was possible and what was too late. You have probably been telling your own story for a very long time. You may have been telling it so long that you have forgotten you are the one telling it. It feels like something that happened to you, not something you are actively constructing. Night after night, in the dark, with the same materials, in the same order, arriving at the same place. But stories can be retold, not rewritten, because the facts are the facts and the past is the past, but retold, with different emphasis, with different details brought forward and different details allowed to rest. The fisherman's life is the same life, whether he tells it as the story of what he missed or the story of what he built. The facts do not change, but the telling changes everything. You might try this right now, quietly, without making a project of it. Think of the sentence that begins your story, the one that starts with "I always" or "I never" or "if only." Hold it in your mind the way you would hold a letter someone wrote you a long time ago. Read it once more, and then ask yourself, gently, is this the whole letter? Or is there more on the other side of the page that I have never turned over? You do not need to answer that question tonight. You do not need to do anything at all. Just notice the next time the voice begins its narration, that it is narrating, that it is selecting, that it is choosing which memories to show you and which ones to keep in the drawer. And in that noticing, you are already doing what the Buddha did under the tree. You are seeing the storyteller. You are saying gently, quietly, without anger or judgment, "I see you." And that is the beginning of being free. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Let the stories rest, all of them. The ones the voice tells and the ones you wish it would tell instead. Let them all settle, like leaves settling on the surface of a very still pond. You do not need to sort them tonight. You do not need to decide which one is true. They are all true. And none of them are you. When you are ready, we will continue together. In the next chapter, we will sit with the part of the voice that takes one small worry and builds it into 100. The part that lies awake at 3 in the morning turning a forgotten errand into a catastrophe. The Buddha had a word for this too, and understanding it may be one of the most useful things you hear tonight. There is one more thing the voice does that may be the most exhausting of all. It takes one small thought and turns it into 100. It takes a single worry, something so minor it barely deserves the word, and it builds from it. One thought becomes two, two become five. Five become a city of thoughts, each one taller and more alarming than the last, until the original worry, the little thing that started it all, is buried so far beneath the pile that you cannot even remember what it was. The Buddha had a word for this. He called it papancha, which is usually translated as mental proliferation, but the meaning is closer to mental spreading or mental multiplying. It describes what happens when the mind takes a single point of contact with the world and expands it, layer after layer, until the original experience is lost beneath a mountain of commentary. In a teaching called the Madhupingdika Sutta, the Buddha described the process with the precision of someone who had watched it happen thousands of times. He said, dependent on contact, there arises feeling. What one feels, one perceives. What one perceives, one thinks about. What one thinks about, one proliferates. And once the proliferation begins, the mind is no longer responding to what is real. It is responding to what it has built on top of what is real. Think about what this means for the voice that keeps you awake at night. It does not start with 100 worries. It starts with one small thought, a flicker, a pebble tossed into still water. And then the mind does what the mind does. It ripples, it spreads, it multiplies. And within a few minutes, the single pebble has become a flood that covers everything. Think about what this means. The Buddha was not describing a flaw or a disease. He was describing a process, a mechanical process, as predictable as one billiard ball striking another. The mind does not choose to proliferate any more than water chooses to flow downhill. It simply follows the slope of its own momentum. One thought touches the next, and the next touches the next. And before long, the mind is very far from where it started, moving fast, building structures out of nothing, and believing every one of them is solid. You know this pattern. You have lived it many times. You are lying in bed and a thought arrives. Did I lock the door? That is the pebble. It is a small thought. It weighs almost nothing. But the mind does not leave it there. The mind picks it up and turns it over and says, what if someone gets in? And from there it says, what if something happens to the children? And from there it says, I am not careful enough. And from there it says, I have never been careful enough. And from there it says, what kind of person forgets to lock the door? And within 5 minutes, a simple question about a lock has become a trial, a judgment, a verdict on your entire character. The door was never the point. The door was just the pebble. Everything that followed was papancha. The old radio does this too. It does not play one song and stop. It plays one song and then it plays a song that reminds it of the first song, and then another that reminds it of the second. And soon the whole room is full of music that no one asked for, music that has nothing to do with the original melody. But the radio cannot stop itself. It is doing what radios do. It is playing, and the voice in your head is doing what voices do. It is proliferating. Let us explore a story about this. In a village built around a stone square, where the old houses leaned toward each other like friends sharing secrets, there was a woman who kept the sundial. It was a large sundial, carved from a single piece of limestone that had been there longer than anyone's memory. It sat in the center of the square, and every morning the woman came out to read the shadow. She had been doing this since her mother died 20 years ago. Her mother had been the Sundial Keeper before her, and her mother's mother before that. The job was simple. She read the shadow. She told the baker when to start his ovens. She told the schoolteacher when to ring the bell. She told the old men sitting on the bench beneath the olive tree what time it was, even though they never asked and never seemed to care. She was good at reading shadows. She knew how the light changed with the seasons, how the shadow shortened in summer and stretched in winter, how a cloudy morning could fool a less experienced eye, but never fooled hers. She had spent 20 years studying one thing, the way light falls on stone, and she had become an authority on it, the way one becomes an authority on anything, not through brilliance, through patience, through showing up every morning and paying attention. One Tuesday in early autumn, she came out to the square and looked at the sundial, and a small cloud was covering the sun. The shadow was gone. She could not read the time. This had happened before, of course, many times. Clouds pass. That is what clouds do. But on this particular Tuesday, for reasons she could not explain, the voice in her head did not wait for the cloud to pass. It began to build. What if it rains today? The voice said. And from there, what if it rains all week? And from there, what if the autumn rains come early this year? And from there, what if the harvest is not ready in time? And from there, what if the crops fail? And from there, what if the village cannot feed itself through winter? She stood in the square looking up at a cloud the size of her hand, and inside her mind, the entire village was starving. The cloud passed in less than 3 minutes. The sun returned. The shadow fell on the stone just where it always fell at that hour of the morning. The baker started his ovens. The schoolteacher rang the bell. The old men on the bench did not look up. But the woman stood there for a long time after the shadow returned. She stood there because she had seen something she had never seen before. Even after 20 years of watching light and shadow, she had seen the cloud in her mind grow larger than the cloud in the sky. She had seen one small absence of light become famine, failure, collapse. 3 minutes of shade had produced an entire winter of disaster, and none of it was real. None of it happened. The cloud passed, as clouds do, and the day went on exactly as it would have gone on if she had never looked up at all. She told no one about the famine. There was no one to tell, and besides, how do you explain to someone that you spent 3 minutes standing in a square, destroying a village that was perfectly fine? The embarrassment of it was almost worse than the fear had been. She was a sensible woman. She had read shadows for 20 years, and yet the voice had taken her from a small cloud to a dead harvest in the time it takes to boil an egg. That evening, she sat with her neighbor, an old man who repaired shoes and had a habit of saying things that were either very wise or very obvious, depending on how you listened. I stood in the square today, she said, and watched myself turn one cloud into a catastrophe. He looked at her over the shoe he was stitching. Just one cloud, he said. Just one, a small one. It covered the sun for 3 minutes. But in my mind, it covered the sun for 3 months. He set his needle down. He thought for a moment. How many clouds have you watched in 20 years, he said. Thousands, she said. And how many of them brought famine? None. she said. He picked up his needle again. Then you already know everything you need to know, he said. The cloud is real, but the famine is the mind talking to itself. What the Sundial Keeper experienced that morning was pancha in its most familiar form. One thought arrived uninvited, one moment of not knowing, of uncertainty, of the shadow disappearing from the stone. And from that single moment, the mind built a tower of worry so tall, it blocked the very sun it was worried about losing. The Buddha described this process as a chain. Each link connects to the next. Contact leads to feeling. Feeling leads to perception. Perception leads to thought. And thought, if left unattended, leads to proliferation. The chain does not ask your permission. It does not wait for you to decide whether the thought is worth following. It simply runs the way water runs downhill, because that is the direction it has always gone. But here is something the Buddha also noticed, something the Sundial Keeper was beginning to see. The chain can be observed. You cannot always stop it, but you can see it. And when you see it, something changes. The tower does not grow as tall. The famine does not seem as certain, because you are no longer inside the proliferation. You are beside it, watching it build, the way you would watch a child stack blocks higher and higher, knowing the tower will fall, knowing it was never meant to stand. Let us explore another story about this. There was a woman who owned a small bookshop in a town where the streets were narrow and the buildings were old, and the evening light came through the front window at an angle that made the dust motes look like something from a painting. She was 58 years old. She had owned the shop for 22 years. She knew every shelf, every stack, every water stain on the ceiling, every creak in the wooden floor. The shop was not making her rich. It was not making her poor. It was making her exactly what she had always been, which was a woman who loved books and had found a way to live among them. One night, she woke at 3 in the morning. The room was dark. The clock on the nightstand said 3:17 in pale blue numbers. And the voice began. It started with a thought so small she almost did not notice it. I forgot to send that invoice. That was all. A minor administrative task, something she could do in 30 seconds from her phone in the morning. But the mind did not wait for morning. The customer will not pay, the voice said. And from there, the shop will be short this month. And from there, I cannot afford the rent if I am short 2 months in a row. And from there, I will have to close the shop. And from there, 22 years of work will end with a locked door and a notice in the window. And from there, my daughter will find out. And from there, she will think I failed. And from there, I have lived my whole life and ended with nothing. She lay in the dark and listened to this chain extend itself, link by link, from a forgotten invoice to the collapse of everything she had built. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. She turned over. She turned back. The clock said 3:41. She had been lying there for 24 minutes. And in those 24 minutes, the voice had taken one forgotten task and turned it into the story of her ruin. At some point, without deciding to, she said something out loud in the dark room. She said, what was the first one? She meant the first thought, the one that started the chain. And she went back through the links, one by one, past the shame and the failure, and the daughter's disappointment, and the closed shop and the unpaid rent, back to the beginning. I forgot to send that invoice. She lay there with that one thought. just that one. Held it the way you hold a pebble in your palm and look at it without adding anything. A forgotten invoice. That was all. It was small. It was manageable. It was the kind of thing she had handled 10,000 times in 22 years without the world ending. And then she remembered something that made her sit up in the dark. The invoices were automatic now. Her daughter had set up the system last spring. The invoice had already been sent. The pebble, the original pebble that had started the whole flood, did not even exist. She lay back down. The clock said 3:48. The room was the same room. It had been 31 minutes ago. The blanket was the same blanket. The dark was the same dark. Nothing had changed in the world outside her mind. The shop was still there on its narrow street, its shelves still full, its door still locked, its invoices already sent by a system her daughter had installed while eating pizza on a Tuesday afternoon last spring. The entire catastrophe, the rent and the failure and the shame and the nothing, all of it had been built on a thought that was not even true. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in a long time, the voice had nothing left to say. Not because she had silenced it, because she had followed the chain back to its beginning and found that the beginning was empty. The first link was made of air, and everything built on top of it was made of air too. The Persian poet Hafiz, who lived in the 14th century and wrote with a tenderness that has survived 600 years of translation, once said something that belongs here. He wrote, "Ever since happiness heard your name, it has been running through the streets trying to find you." It is a line about joy, but it also says something about the way papancha works in reverse, because worry does the same thing. Worry hears your name and runs through the streets looking for you. It runs through every street it can find. It looks in the shop and the bedroom and the bank account and the doctor's office and the past and the future and the faces of your children. It runs and it runs, and it never stops to ask whether you are actually in any of those places, because you are not. You are here, in this bed, in this room, in this moment. And the worry is running through streets that do not exist, looking for a version of you that is not real, building emergencies from pebbles that were never there. This is what 3 in the morning does. It removes all the things that normally keep the mind honest. During the day, reality checks in constantly. You see the shop is open. You see customers come through the door. You see the shelves full of books and the register working and the lights on. Reality interrupts the chain before it gets too long. But at 3 in the morning, reality is asleep. The room is dark. The shop is miles away. And the voice has no competition. It can build as high as it wants, because there is nothing to knock the tower down. Nothing except you. Nothing except the one who follows the chain back to the beginning and finds the pebble and holds it up and sees it for what it is. The Buddha said, for one of unsteady mind, who does not know the true Dhamma, whose serenity wavers, wisdom is not perfected. Notice the phrase unsteady mind, not wicked mind, not broken mind, unsteady, a mind that wobbles. A mind takes one small tremor and shakes itself into an earthquake. This is not a flaw in your character. This is what minds do when they are not watched. They proliferate, they spread. They build towers out of clouds and famines out of shadows. And they do it so convincingly, so thoroughly, that by the time they are finished, you have forgotten that the whole thing started with a pebble you could have set down in 3 seconds. So here is something to carry with you tonight. When you notice the voice beginning to multiply, when one worry becomes 2, and 2 become 10, and 10 become the whole collapsing story of your life, try going back to the very first thought, the original one, the pebble before the ripples. You will often find it is very small, small enough to hold in one hand, small enough to set down, and sometimes, like the bookshop owner discovered in the dark, you will find that the pebble was never there at all, that the whole chain was built on a thought that had already been taken care of, a problem that had already been solved, a fear that had no ground to stand on. You do not need to stop the proliferation. That is not how this works. The mind will multiply because that is what minds do. The way water flows, because that is what water does. But you can follow the chain back. You can find the first link. And when you hold it up to the light and see it clearly, just one small thought, just one pebble, the tower it built loses something. Not its existence, its authority. It is still there. But it is no longer the truth. It is just papancha. Just the mind doing what the mind does when no one is watching. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a slow breath. If there is a chain of thoughts running through your mind right now, you do not need to untangle it. Just notice where it started. Just find the first link. Hold it gently. See how small it is, how manageable, how ordinary. The voice made it sound enormous, but the voice exaggerates. It always has. And you, the one holding the pebble, the one who followed the chain back to its beginning, you are larger than anything the voice has built tonight. When you are ready, we will continue together. In the next chapter, we will explore something the voice almost never shows you. The gaps, the silences, the spaces between one thought and the next, where something very old and very quiet has been waiting for you all along. We have spent some time now with the voice. We have heard it talk. We have heard it label. We have heard it tell stories and multiply worries. And through all of that, through every chapter of its performance, there has been something else present that we have not yet looked at directly. The silence, not the silence of an empty room or a switched-off radio, something different. The silence that exists between one thought and the next, the pause, the gap. It is very short, sometimes less than a second, but it is there. The way the space between two notes is there in a piece of music. And without it, the music would not be music, it would be noise. The Buddha pointed to this silence in one of his most extraordinary teachings. In the Udāna, he said there is, monks, that sphere where there is neither earth, nor water, nor fire, nor air. There is not the sphere of infinite space, nor the sphere of infinite consciousness. There is not this world, nor another world, nor sun, nor moon. I call it neither coming nor going, nor standing still, nor falling away, nor arising. Ride those words again slowly. He was not describing a place. He was describing a quality of awareness that exists before the mind adds anything to it. Before earth, before water, before thought, before opinion, before the voice has time to begin its narration. There is something already here, something that does not come and does not go, something that does not need to be created because it was never absent. In the old language, this was called sunyata, which is usually translated as emptiness, but the word is misleading. When most people hear emptiness, they think of something missing, something hollow, something sad. But the Buddhist understanding of sunyata is closer to spaciousness. It is the space that allows everything to appear. Think of the sky. The sky is empty, in a sense. There is nothing in the sky itself. But that emptiness is what allows clouds and birds and stars and rain and light to move through it. Without the emptiness, there would be no room for anything. The sky is not empty, despite having nothing in it. It is vast because of having nothing in it. Your mind works the same way. The thoughts that pass through it, the worries, the plans, the memories, the opinions, they are clouds. They are real. They have shape and weight, and sometimes they carry rain. But they are not the sky. And when they pass, which they always do, the sky is still there, unchanged, unhurt, as wide and as open as it was before the first cloud ever formed. Between one thought and the next, there is a space. It is small. The voice rushes to fill it, the way water rushes to fill a crack. But the space is there. It has always been there. And in that space, something is present that the voice has been covering up for as long as you can remember. A kind of quiet awareness that does not think, does not judge, does not worry, does not plan. It simply is. The way the sky simply is, whether clouds are passing through it or not. Let us explore a story about this. In a workshop on the side of a mountain, where the fog came in most mornings, and the trees grew at an angle from years of wind, there lived an old man who made bells. Not the small bells you hang above a door or tie to a ribbon, temple bells. Large bronze, heavy enough that 2 men had to carry them. He had been making them for 40 years, and his hands were scarred from the casting. And his hearing was not what it had been, though he could still tell a good bell from a poor one by the way the sound moved through his chest. He had one apprentice, a young man, who had come to learn the craft 3 years ago and was beginning to understand the bronze, but had not yet understood the sound. One afternoon, with the fog sitting low on the trees, and the workshop smelling of charcoal and metal, the apprentice asked a question. "Where does the sound of a bell begin?" he said. The old man looked at him for a moment. Then he picked up a wooden mallet and struck the largest bell in the workshop. The sound filled the room. It was low and full, and it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Not just from the bell, but from the walls and the floor and the fog outside, and the bones of anyone standing close enough to feel it. They stood in the sound for a long time. The apprentice listened. The old man watched him listen. Slowly, gradually, the way evening becomes night without anyone being able to say exactly. When it happened, the sound faded. It did not stop. It faded. It thinned. It became something you felt more than heard. And then it was gone. Or rather, it was not gone. It had returned to the silence it came from. The silence that had been there before the mallet struck. And that was there now, after the last trace of vibration had dissolved into the air. "Now tell me," the old man said, "where did the sound end?" The apprentice opened his mouth and then closed it. He had no answer, because the sound had not ended in a place. It had ended in a quality. It had ended in silence, and the silence was not the absence of the sound. The silence was what the sound had been resting in the whole time. The sound had come from silence and returned to silence, and the silence itself had never been disturbed. It had simply held the sound the way a bowl holds water, without being the water, without being changed by the water, without being emptied when the water is poured out. The apprentice sat on the workshop floor. The fog pressed against the windows. The charcoal in the forge ticked as it cooled. "I have been listening to the wrong thing," he said quietly. I have been listening to the sound. I should have been listening to what the sound is inside of." The old man nodded. He set the mallet down. "That is why we make bells," he said. "Not for the sound. For the silence the sound reveals." The apprentice stayed on the floor of the workshop for a long time. The old man went back to his work. He did not explain further. He did not give a lecture on emptiness or silence or the nature of sound. He had said what he needed to say, and the bell had said the rest. Some teachings arrive through words. Others arrive through the space that words leave behind. Years later, when the apprentice had become a bell maker himself, someone asked him why his bells sounded different from other bells. He said, "I do not make the sound. I make the shape of the silence that holds it." He had learned from the old man on the mountain that the silence was not something that happened after the bell stopped ringing. It was something that was happening the whole time. The sound was inside the silence, the way a fish is inside the water. Take away the water and there is no fish. Take away the silence and there is no sound. They need each other, but the silence came first. What the bell maker understood after 40 years of casting bronze and listening to the ring of metal was what the Buddha was pointing to in the Udāna. The silence is not the absence of the voice. It is the ground the voice stands on. It is the room the radio plays in. And the room was there before the radio was turned on, and it will be there after the radio is turned off. And it is there right now, even while the radio is playing. If you listen carefully enough to hear past the station, to the space it broadcasts into, in the Celtic tradition, from the ancient coastlands of Ireland and Scotland and Wales, there is a concept called the thin place. A thin place is a location where the boundary between the ordinary world and something larger grows so thin it nearly disappears. The old Celts believed certain places held this quality. A hilltop where the wind never stopped. A shoreline where the tide came in with a sound like breathing. A stone circle where the light at dusk seemed to bend in ways it did not bend anywhere else. In these places, they said, you were closer to the other side. Not a different world exactly. The same world, seen without the usual curtain between you and it. The silence between thoughts is a thin place. It is a gap in the curtain. A moment where the voice pauses, if only for half a second, and something else shows through. Not a vision, not a mystical experience, just the raw, unnarrated fact of being here, being alive, being aware, without the commentary, without the labels, without the story. Just the thin place itself, where you are closer to what you actually are than the voice has ever let you be. You may have felt this before without knowing what to call it. You may have felt it on a morning when you stepped outside and the air was so cold and so clean that for 1 second, just one, the voice went quiet and there was nothing but the cold and the air and you. You may have felt it watching a grandchild sleep when the room was so still and the child so peaceful that something in you opened up, and for a moment there was no worry, no planning, no remembering, just the sight of a small chest rising and falling. You may have felt it right here, tonight, listening to these words, in the small pauses between sentences, when the voice in your head briefly stopped its commentary. And there was just the sound and the silence and the bed beneath you and the night around you. The Celtic monks who lived on the rocky islands off the west coast of Ireland understood this. They built their small stone beehive huts in places where the wind never stopped and the sea was always moving because the wind and the sea made the silence louder. Not quieter, louder. The way a candle flame is more visible in a dark room than in a bright one. The noise of the wind made the silence inside the hut more vivid, more present, more real. They were not running from the world. They were going to the place where the thin place was thinnest. Those moments are not special. That is the important thing. They are not rare gifts that come and go unpredictably. They are always available. The silence is always there. Between every two thoughts, the way the sky is always there, between every two clouds. You do not need to create it. You do not need to earn it. You only need to notice it. Here at Moonlit Dharma, this is what we keep coming back to. Not techniques for fixing the mind, not methods for becoming someone different. Just the quiet act of noticing what is already here. The silence between the notes. The space between the clouds. The room that the radio plays in. Let us explore another story about this. There was a woman who had not slept well in years. She was 62. She had tried everything. The warm milk, the lavender pillow, the breathing exercises she read about in a magazine at the dentist's office, the meditation app her son installed on her phone, which played the sound of rain on a tin roof, which she liked for the first 3 nights, and then began to find irritating because the rain never varied and real rain always varies, and she could not stop noticing the loop. One night, lying in the dark with the streetlight coming through the curtain in a thin, yellow line, and the clock ticking on the wall, the way it had ticked every night for 30 years, she decided to try something different. She decided to count the gaps, not the thoughts. The gaps between the thoughts. A thought would come. I need to call the plumber about the kitchen faucet. Then a gap, very small, less than a second. Then another thought. Did Sarah ever call back about Sunday? Then another gap. She began to count them. 1, 2, 3. At first, the gaps were so small she almost missed them. The voice filled them almost before they appeared. The way it always did, rushing in with the next opinion, the next worry, the next memory. But she kept counting, and something began to happen that she had not expected. The gaps got longer, not because she was forcing them, not because she was doing anything at all, really, except noticing. But the act of noticing the gaps seemed to widen them slightly. The way looking at anything closely makes it appear larger. Gap number 7 lasted nearly 2 seconds. Gap number 12 lasted 3. And in those seconds, in those small open windows between one thought and the next, she noticed something. There was no worry in the gap. There was no regret. There was no voice telling her she should be sleeping, or that tomorrow would be hard, or that she had forgotten something important. There was no I at all. There was just the room, the clock, the thin yellow line of streetlight on the ceiling, the weight of the blanket on her feet, and a spaciousness that felt like the first deep breath after holding your breath for a very long time. She did not remember falling asleep. She did not remember reaching any particular number. She remembered gap number 14 or 15, and then the next thing she knew, it was morning. The light had changed from yellow to grey to something almost white. The clock was still ticking. The faucet still needed a plumber. But she felt rested in a way she had not felt in months, perhaps years. What she had found, without trying, was the thin place inside her own mind, the place between one thought and the next, where the curtain was so thin it was barely there. She had not gone to a hilltop or a shoreline or a stone circle. She had gone to a gap, a pause, a space no wider than a held breath. And in that space, everything the voice had been saying all night, the plumber and the faucet and the phone call and the worry, all of it was gone, not pushed away, not fought, simply absent the way clouds are absent from a clear sky. Not because someone removed them, because the wind moved on. She did not tell anyone what she had done. It seemed too simple to explain. I counted the gaps between my thoughts and I fell asleep. It sounds like nothing, but it was not nothing. It was, in its quiet way, what the sixth patriarch Huineng was pointing at, when he said from the first, not a thing is. From the very beginning, before the voice, before the thoughts, before the labels, and the stories, and the multiplying worries, there was this spaciousness, this open ground, this thin place where nothing needs to be added and nothing needs to be taken away. She tried it again the next night, and the night after that. Some nights the gaps were harder to find. The voice was louder, more insistent, more determined to fill every available second with its opinions and its fears. On those nights, she found maybe 3 or 4 gaps before sleep came. Other nights, the gaps opened more easily, and she could rest in them the way you rest in a warm bath, not doing anything, not going anywhere, just being held by something that required nothing of you. After a few weeks, she noticed something else. The gaps were not only between thoughts, they were between feelings too. Between one wave of worry and the next, there was a pause. Between one pang of regret and the next, there was a breath. And in those pauses, in those breaths, the same spaciousness was there, the same quiet ground. As though the silence was not something that existed only in the mind, but something that ran beneath everything, the way bedrock runs beneath a landscape, unseen but holding it all up. The woman did not become a meditator. She did not read any books about Buddhism or emptiness or the nature of mind. She simply found on one ordinary night, in one ordinary bedroom, that the silence had been there all along, waiting patiently between each thought, never once demanding to be noticed, never once going away because it had been ignored. It was the most patient thing she had ever encountered, more patient than her mother, more patient than time. It was simply there, and when she finally turned toward it, it did not say, "I told you so." It said nothing at all. That was the whole point. So, here is something simple to carry with you tonight. You do not need to stop the voice. You do not need to empty your mind. You do not need to achieve a state of perfect stillness. Just notice the next gap, the small pause between one thought ending and the next one beginning. Rest there. Even half a second is enough. In that half second, the whole sky is available to you, the whole room, without the radio. The whole silence that the bellmaker spent 40 years learning to hear. It has been here all along. It will be here tomorrow, and it is here right now, in the pause at the end of this sentence, before the next one begins. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a slow breath. Feel the gap between the inhale and the exhale, that small turning point where the breath is neither coming in nor going out, just resting, just paused. That is a thin place too. That is sunyata. Not emptiness, spaciousness, room for everything, room for nothing, room for you as you are tonight, without anything added and without anything taken away. When you are ready, we will continue together. In the next chapter, the last chapter, we will sit with the voice one more time, not as an enemy, not as a problem to be solved, but as a companion you have come to know well enough. Finally, to live alongside without being carried away. We have arrived at the last chapter of our time together tonight. And it begins with a question that may surprise you, because it is not the question most people expect. The question is not, how do I stop the voice? The question is, how do I live with it? Because the voice is not going away. It will be there tomorrow morning when you open your eyes. It will be there when you pour your coffee, when you check your phone, when you sit in the car waiting for the engine to warm up. It will comment and judge and remember and worry, the way it has always done, the way it will always do. The question was never whether the voice would stop. The question was always whether you could hear it without believing every word it says. The Buddha said, those who subdue the mind are freed from the bonds of Mara. But notice the word subdue. He did not say destroy. He did not say silence. He did not say defeat. He said subdue, the way you subdue a restless horse, not by breaking it, by learning to ride it, by understanding its nature, by sitting with it long enough that it begins to trust you, and you begin to trust yourself with it. Tonight we have walked a long way together, though neither of us has left the room. We have walked through the interior landscape of the mind, and we have met the voice in every form it takes. This is what everything we have explored tonight has been moving toward. In the first chapter, we noticed the voice. We heard it the way the Incense Maker heard it for the first time, lying on her mat in the dark, realizing that the voice was separate from her. In the second chapter, we looked behind the voice and found that what we call the self is not a fixed, solid thing, but a river, constantly moving, constantly changing. In the third chapter, we watched the voice label everything it touched, the way the retired principal graded everything she saw, and we found that the labels are additions, not facts. In the fourth chapter, we heard the voice tell its story, the way the Old Fisherman told his story about the university, and we saw that the story is one version, not the only version. In the fifth chapter, we watched the voice multiply, building towers of worry from a single pebble, the way the bookshop owner built a catastrophe from a forgotten invoice that had already been sent. In the sixth chapter, we rested in the silence between thoughts, the thin place where the bell maker learned to listen and where the woman who counted gaps found sleep. And now we are here, at the place where all of those insights come together into something very simple. You do not need to fix the voice. You do not need to fight it. You do not need to become someone who never worries, never doubts, never lies awake at 3 a.m. turning things over. You just need to change your relationship with it, from inside to beside, from the radio to the room, from the passenger who goes wherever the voice takes her to the woman standing in her own garden, hearing the radio, hearing the birds, hearing the wind, and choosing gently which one to listen to. Let us explore a story about this. There was a woman who kept a garden behind a small wooden cottage at the end of a lane that smelled of honeysuckle in the summer and wet leaves in the autumn. She was 68. She had lived alone since her husband died 11 years ago, and the garden had become the thing she talked to when there was no one else to talk to. She talked to the tomatoes when they were slow. She talked to the roses when they were stubborn. She talked to the weeds when she pulled them, apologizing as she went, because she had the kind of heart that apologized to weeds. In the corner of her garden shed, there was an old radio. It had been there when she moved in, and it had been running ever since. She did not know how old it was. The case was yellowed, and the dial was stuck on a station that played everything. News and advertisements and old songs and talk shows and weather reports for towns she had never heard of. It played all day. It played all night. She could hear it from the garden when the wind was right. A low murmur beneath the birdsong and the rustle of leaves. For years she had tried to turn it off. She had pressed every button. She had turned every knob. She had pulled the plug from the wall and stood there holding the cord in her hand while the radio played on without it, as though the electricity had been a formality all along. She had taken it to the repair shop in town, and the man behind the counter had looked at it and looked at her and said, "I have never seen a radio like this. There is no off switch." She had brought it home and put it back on the shelf in the shed and sat in her garden that evening, listening to it play through the walls, and she had cried, not because the radio was loud, but because she was tired. She was so tired of the noise. But the radio kept playing. It was not connected to anything she could find. It simply ran, the way some old machines run, on their own momentum, on the memory of being plugged in so long that stopping had become impossible. At first it bothered her. The constant chatter, the opinions no one asked for, the predictions about weather that never came, and disasters that never arrived. She wore earplugs. She closed the shed door. She put a blanket over it. Nothing worked. The radio played through blankets. It played through closed doors. It played through earplugs. It played through everything she placed between herself and its voice. Then one spring morning, something shifted. She was kneeling in the garden, planting sweet peas along the fence, her hands dark with soil, the sun warm on the back of her neck. The radio was playing. It was talking about something, a storm coming, or a traffic report, or a scandal in some distant city. She could hear it. But she could also hear the finch in the birch tree. She could hear the wind moving through the rosemary bush. She could hear the creak of the garden gate on its old hinge. She could hear the sound her trowel made when it turned the soil, a soft, satisfying sound, like the earth opening to receive something. She stayed like that for a while, kneeling in the dirt, her hands working the soil, her mind somewhere between the birdsong and the breeze, and the quiet satisfaction of putting something alive into the ground. The radio talked on. It was saying something about interest rates, or perhaps it was a quiz show, or perhaps it was a man selling insurance. She could not tell. She could not tell because she was not listening. And she realized, kneeling there with dirt under her fingernails and the sun on her neck and the finch singing its small song, that she had not been listening to the radio. Not because it had stopped. It had not stopped. It was still playing. She could hear it if she turned her attention toward it. But she had not been listening. She had been listening to the garden. And the garden was louder. Not because it was making more noise, but because she was closer to it. She stood up and looked at the shed. The radio murmured from inside. She looked at the garden around her, the sweet peas she had just planted, the fence with its peeling paint, the birch tree, the sky. "I do not need to turn it off," she said to no one in particular. "I just need to be out here." She went inside the shed that evening. She did not close the door. She did not cover the radio. She sat on the old wooden stool next to it and listened for a while, the way you listen to an old relative who tells the same stories at every holiday dinner. The voice was familiar. It was not unkind, not really. It was just busy. It had been talking for so long it had forgotten how to stop. And she had been sitting so close to it for so long she had forgotten she could walk away. That is what integration looks like. Not a great victory, not a moment of blinding insight. Just a woman sitting on a stool next to an old radio, listening without obeying, hearing without believing, present without needing to change anything at all. The radio was the radio. She was she. And for the first time in years, that distinction was clear. Not because she had struggled to make it clear, but because she had finally stopped struggling. She left the shed door open that night. The radio played softly into the garden. She could hear it from the porch, where she sat with her tea, mixing with the crickets and the last of the bird song. It was just one sound among many, not the only sound, not the loudest sound, just a sound. And she was the woman in the garden, hearing all of it, choosing none of it, resting in the whole evening the way you rest in a bath, surrounded by warmth, held by something larger than any single thing within it. This is what the Buddha meant by a rightly directed mind. In the Dhammapada, he said neither mother nor father nor any relative can do as much good as a rightly directed mind. Not a perfect mind, not a silent mind, a rightly directed mind. One that is pointed toward the garden instead of the radio. One that knows where to rest its attention, even while the noise continues, even while the old station plays on. Let us return now to the story we have been following since the beginning. The story of the man who left a palace, walked into a forest, and sat beneath a tree until he could see every voice in his mind for what it was. After his awakening, the Buddha did not live in permanent silence. The voices did not stop. Mara, that old force of illusion, the voice of desire and fear and doubt, continued to visit him. The old text described this quite clearly. Mara came back. Again and again, in the years that followed, Mara appeared, sometimes as temptation, sometimes as discouragement, sometimes as a low voice in a quiet moment saying, "Who do you think you are? Or this will not last, or they will forget you." But something had changed. Before the awakening, Siddhartha had been inside the voice. He had believed it. He had followed it. He had taken its opinions as facts and its stories as truth. After the awakening, he was beside it. And from that position, something very quiet happened each time Mara arrived. The Buddha would look at Mara the way you might look at an old acquaintance who shows up at your door uninvited, and he would say, "I see you, Mara. Not go away, not you are wrong, not I am stronger than you, just I see you." The simplest possible acknowledgement. I know what you are. I know what you are doing. And because I can see you, you cannot move me. There is a scene described in the old texts that has stayed with practitioners for centuries because of how ordinary it is. Mara arrives. The Buddha is sitting with his monks. And instead of drawing a sword or casting a spell or summoning divine protection, the Buddha simply looks up and says, "Ah, Mara, there you are. That is all. No drama, no battle, just recognition. The way you might recognize an old neighbor who always comes by with the same complaint. You do not need to agree with the complaint. You do not need to fix it. You just need to see who is at the door." And then, in what may be the most generous gesture in all of Buddhist teaching, the Buddha would invite Mara to sit down. He would say, "Come, have tea, sit with me." He treated the voice not as an enemy to be destroyed, but as a guest to be received. A guest who would come and go, who would say familiar things and try familiar tricks, but who could not stay forever because guests never do. They arrive, they sit, they drink their tea, and then they leave, and the room remains. Think about what this means for the voice in your head tonight. The voice is Mara, not an evil Mara, not a dangerous Mara, just a visitor. An old, familiar visitor who knows your name and knows your fears and knows exactly which buttons to press because it has been pressing them for decades. And you can do what the Buddha did. You can look at the voice and say, I see you. You can invite it to sit. You can let it say whatever it is going to say. And then you can watch it leave, the way all visitors leave, because it has nowhere to live inside you unless you give it a room. And you are no longer giving it a room. You are giving it a cup of tea and a chair by the door. In the Zulu tradition of Southern Africa, there is a word that carries a similar understanding. The word is Ubuntu, and it means a person is a person through other persons. It is usually understood as a teaching about community, about the way we exist in relationship with each other. But it says something about the voice too, because the voice tries to isolate you. It tries to make you believe you are alone with your worries, alone with your failures, alone with the story it has been telling you for decades. But you are not alone. You are here, in a room, or a bed, or a chair, on a night that other people are also living through, in a world that is holding you the same way it holds everyone else. The voice says you are separate. It says, no one understands what you are going through. It says you are the only one lying awake, the only one with this particular shade of worry, the only one whose radio plays this particular station. But the truth is, you are connected to the ground beneath you, to the air around you, to every person who has ever lain awake at night and heard the same radio playing the same old songs. The Zen master Bodhidharma, who brought Buddhism from India to China and sat facing a wall for 9 years, said something that belongs here at the end of our evening. He said not thinking about anything is Zen. Once you know this, walking, sitting, or lying down, everything you do is Zen. He said this after sitting facing a wall for 9 years. 9 years of listening to the voice. 9 years of hearing it say, this is pointless, you are wasting your life, turn around. And after 9 years, he did not say the voice went away, he said, everything became Zen. Everything, including the voice, including the wall, including the 9 years of doubt. Because he was not saying you should never think. He was saying that when you stop mistaking the thinking for yourself, when you stop believing that the voice is you and the thoughts are commands and the worries are prophecies, then everything becomes simpler. Walking is walking. Sitting is sitting. Lying down is lying down. The radio plays on, and you are the one in the garden, hearing it all, held by it all, free within it all. In the old language, this quality of awareness, this gentle remembering that you are not the voice, is called sati. The word is usually translated as mindfulness, but its original meaning is closer to remembering. Not remembering the past, remembering the present, remembering that you are here, remembering that the voice is there, remembering that they are not the same thing. Sati is the thread that runs through everything we have explored tonight. It is the incense maker noticing the voice for the first time. It is the garden keeper walking out into the morning. It is the Buddha touching the earth and saying, I am here. It is you, right now, hearing these words and knowing that the one who hears them is not the one who worries. Sati is not something you need to develop or practice or perfect. It is something you need to remember, and you have been remembering it all evening. Every time you notice the voice instead of following it, you were practicing sati. Every time you saw a thought as a thought, instead of as the truth, you were practicing sati. You have been doing it this whole time. You just did not know it had a name. So here is something to carry with you, not just tonight, but any night the voice is loud. You do not need to win. You do not need to fix anything. You do not need to make the voice stop. Just notice it, name it gently. There is the voice. And then return to wherever you are. The breath, the pillow, the weight of the blanket on your body, the sound of the room. That is enough. That has always been enough. Let us pause here for a moment. Take one slow breath. Feel how far we have come together tonight. From the first moment you noticed the voice to this moment, here, where you can hear it and know it and let it be, the way the garden keeper lets the radio play while she tends her flowers. The voice is still there. It may always be there, but you are here too, and you are larger than anything it has ever said. You are the garden. You are the room. You are the silence that holds the bell's ring and the space that holds the cloud. You are the one who has been here all along, through every name and every role and every chapter of this long, full, continuing life. And tonight you remembered. When you are ready, we will move gently toward the close of our evening together. We have come to the end of our time together tonight. And before we part, I want to share something with you. Something personal. A woman once wrote to us here at Moonlit Dharma. She said she had been lying in bed one night, the house dark, everyone else asleep, and the voice in her head was doing what it always did. Listing her failures, replaying old conversations, telling her she had not done enough, been enough, given enough. And she said that on that particular night, for no reason she could explain, she heard the voice differently. She heard it the way you hear a neighbor's television through a wall. Still playing, still talking, but clearly, obviously not hers. She said it changed everything. Not because the voice stopped. It did not stop. But because she realized she had spent decades obeying a voice she had never questioned. The way you obey an alarm clock without asking who said it. That is why we made this video. Because that realization, the one she had lying alone in the dark, is available to everyone. It does not require training or talent, or a particular kind of mind. It requires only what you have been doing tonight. Listening, noticing, seeing the voice for what it is, an old radio, a familiar guest, a narrator who has been telling your story in one version for so long that you forgot there were others. Tonight we have sat with that voice together. We met the Incense Maker, who lay on her mat in the dark and heard the voice for the first time, not the content of its words, but the fact of its existence, and who told her neighbor, the next morning, I thought the voice was me. We followed Siddhartha out of his palace and into the forest, past the sleeping guards and the lotus pools, following something deeper than the voice that said, stay. We sat with the woman who changed her name 3 times and found, at the kitchen table one evening, that underneath all the names, there was someone who had no name at all. We dreamed with Zhuangzi, who woke from being a butterfly and could not say which life was the real one. We watched the tea seller pour from the same pot for 2 travelers who tasted 2 different teas, and we understood that the bitterness and the sweetness were additions, not the tea itself. We knelt in the garden with the retired principal who saw a flower one morning without grading it and felt the world grow wider than she remembered. We sat on the dock with the old fisherman who told one story about his life for 50 years, until his granddaughter, sharp and 17, showed him it was only one version. We watched Mara come to Siddhartha under the tree, offering desire and fear and doubt, and we watched Siddhartha touch the earth and say, "I am here." We stood in the square with the Sundial Keeper, who turned one small cloud into a famine in 3 minutes. We lay in the dark with the Bookshop Owner, who built a catastrophe from an invoice that had already been sent. We listened with the Bellmaker's Apprentice until we could hear not just the sound, but the silence the sound was resting in. We counted gaps with the woman who could not sleep until the gaps grew wide enough to hold her. We walked into the garden with the woman who kept the old radio in her shed, and we learned with her that you do not need to turn the radio off. You just need to step outside. And we sat with the Buddha one last time, after his awakening when Mara came back, as Mara always does, and we watched the Buddha do the simplest thing in the world. He said, "I see you, Mara," and he poured him a cup of tea. All of these people, real and imagined, ancient and modern, sat with the same voice you are sitting with tonight. And they all found the same thing. Not a way to silence the voice, not a trick to make it stop. Just a way to hear it without being moved by it. A way to be in the room with the radio, without mistaking the radio for themselves. The Buddha called this anattā, not self. The voice is not you. The thoughts are not you. The stories and the labels and the worries and the multiplying fears are not you. You are the awareness in which all of them appear. You are the room. You have always been the room. And the room does not need the radio to be turned off in order to be at peace. It simply needs to remember what it is. Now let us hear one last story. In a narrow street, in a town where the lamplighters used to walk at dusk, with long poles and small flames, there lived an old woman who made lamps. She was 75. Her workshop was small, no bigger than a bedroom, and it smelled of oil and brass and the particular warmth that comes from decades of fire in a confined space. Tools hung on every wall, molds lined the shelves. The floor was stained with years of spilled wax and metal filings that had worked themselves into the grain of the wood until the wood itself seemed to glow. She had made lamps her entire life. Her first lamp, made when she was 12, still sat on a shelf above the door, crooked and dull and slightly lopsided. But she had never thrown it away. It was the beginning of everything, and now on this night she was making her last. She was retiring. Not because her hands had stopped working or her eyes had gone dim, though both were true in small ways that she noticed more each year. She was retiring because 75 years is a long time to do anything. And she was tired in the way that has nothing to do with sleep. The voice had been with her the entire time. Every lamp she made, the voice had something to say. The wick is crooked. The brass is too thin. This one is not as good as the last one. For 63 years, from the age of 12 to the age of 75, the voice had watched her work and found something wrong with every lamp she made. Not once in 63 years had the voice said, "This one is perfect." Not once had it said, "You can stop now." Not once had it said, "You have made enough." On the wall above her bench there was a small piece of paper, yellowed with age, on which someone had written a number. 10,412. That was how many lamps she had made. She had kept count for the first 20 years, and then the number had become too large to matter. But her daughter had found the old ledger books and added them up one afternoon and written the total on this scrap of paper and pinned it to the wall. 10,412 lamps, enough to light a small city, enough to fill every window on every street in every town she had ever visited. And the voice had found fault with every single one. She sat at her workbench on this last night with a single piece of brass in her hands. The workshop was quiet. The street outside was dark. The voice was there, as it always was, and it was saying the things it always said. The edges are not even. You should start over. This is not your best work. She listened to the voice. She did not argue with it. She did not try to make it stop. She had spent 63 years arguing with it, and it had never once conceded a point. So tonight she did something different. She listened to it the way you listen to rain on a roof. Present, steady, not personal, just a sound the evening was making. She finished the lamp. She trimmed the wick. She poured the oil, and then she lit it. The flame caught and steadied, and the workshop filled with a warm orange glow. The tools on the walls cast long shadows. The old lamp above the door, the first one she had ever made, caught the light and seemed for a moment less crooked than she remembered. The voice said it is not bright enough, and she smiled. Not because the voice was wrong. Maybe it was not bright enough. Maybe no lamp is ever bright enough. But she smiled because she could hear it now. She could hear it clearly, the way the Incense Maker heard it on her mat, the way the garden keeper heard the radio from the porch. She could hear that it was a voice, just a voice. One sound in a room full of sounds. And she, the one hearing it, was something else entirely. She was the woman who had made 10,000 lamps. She was the hands that shaped the brass and trimmed the wick and poured the oil. She was the one who had shown up every morning for 63 years and done the work. Not because the voice said she was good enough, but despite the fact that it never did. She sat in the glow of her last lamp for a long time. The voice grew quieter. Not because she silenced it, because she no longer needed it to tell her who she was. She already knew. She had always known. She had just been sitting too close to the radio to hear it. The Lampmaker did not read the Buddha's teachings. She did not know the word anattā, or the word sati, or the word sunyata. She did not know about the 5 khandhas, or the Madhupindika Sutta, or Bahia's question on the road. She knew brass. She knew wicks. She knew fire. And she knew on this last night, sitting in the glow of her last lamp, that the voice had been a companion, not a commander. It had walked beside her for 63 years, offering its opinions, and she had done the work anyway. Every single lamp, 10,412 of them, made not because the voice said she was ready, but because her hands said it was time. And that is where we will leave you tonight. The voice will still be there in the morning. It will comment on how you slept. It will remind you of something you need to do. It will have opinions about the weather and the news and the face you see in the mirror. That is what voices do. It has been doing it faithfully for 50, 60, 70 years. It kept you safe when your children were small. It reminded you to check the stove and lock the door. It helped you plan and worry and prepare for things that sometimes happened and sometimes did not. It earned its place, but it is not you. It was never you. And now you know something you did not know before. You know it is a voice. and you are the one hearing it. You are the room. You are the sky. You are the silence between the notes of a bell that is still ringing somewhere softly in a workshop on the side of a mountain. Tomorrow, when the voice starts talking, as it will, as it always does, you might try one small thing. You might say quietly to yourself, there is the voice. Not I am worried, not I am not enough, just there is the voice. And in that small shift, that tiny step from inside to beside, you will be doing what the Buddha did under the tree. You will be doing what the Incense Maker did on her mat. You will be doing what the Lampmaker did on her last night in the workshop. You will be seeing the storyteller, and that is where freedom begins. If this evening meant something to you, we would be grateful if you would subscribe to Moonlit Dharma and share this with someone who might need it tonight. We are here every week, in the quiet hours, keeping the lamp lit for anyone who needs a place to rest. Before you go, here is one last breath. Take it slowly, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Feel the pause at the turning point, that thin place between the inhale and the exhale, where nothing is happening and everything is at peace. The old radio is still playing. But you are not the radio. You never were. You are the one in the room. And the room is very quiet tonight, and you are very safe. And sleep, when it comes, will find you here, resting in the space between the notes, held by the silence that has been waiting for you all along. Good night, and thank you for being here.